No lawyer? Didn't even bother hiring one? Brian laughed. The sound echoed through the courtroom. Donna laughed with him. She leaned toward the woman beside her. I told you. She doesn't stand a chance. Someone in the back let out a quiet chuckle. Another person slowly shook their head. I stayed where I was. Alone. No attorney. No family beside me. A small black suitcase rested next to my chair. A slim case file sat on the table. Brian looked at me with a smug grin. Karen, the least you could have done was pretend you were going to fight. Don't make this any more pathetic than it already is. I didn't answer. I simply bent down, picked up my case file, walked to my table, pulled out my chair, and sat. I placed the folder neatly in front of me, then folded my hands together, and waited. All rise. The clerk's voice cut through the room. The door behind the bench opened. The judge walked in. Everyone rose at once. The scrape of dozens of chairs echoed across the marble floor. A moment later, everyone sat back down. The hearing began. Brian was still smiling. His attorney leaned comfortably against his chair, casually twirling a pen between his fingers. He hadn't even opened his briefcase yet. Everything about him said the same thing. This was just another routine hearing. One they'd already won. The judge opened the file in front of him. The first page. Then the second. His movements slowed. A slight crease formed between his brows. He read the page again. Then a third time. No one spoke. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Brian's attorney slowly rose to his feet. Your Honor, may I see that file? The judge didn't answer. He simply slid it across the bench. The attorney leaned over, turned the first page, and froze. The pen slipped from his hand. It rolled quietly across the table, coming to rest at the very edge. Oh, my God. The words barely escaped his lips. No one moved. Brian frowned. What is it? His attorney kept staring at the file. He never answered. Donna leaned forward. Is something wrong? The judge removed his glasses, set them gently on the bench, then looked directly at Brian. For a long moment. Long enough for the smile to disappear from Brian's face. Mr. Mitchell? His voice was calm. I don't think your wife's decision to come here without an attorney is what you should be worried about. I think you should be worried about what you failed to disclose to this court. Brian blinked. What do you mean? The judge didn't respond. He simply closed the file. We'll get to that soon enough. For the first time since he walked into that courtroom, Brian wasn't smiling anymore. My name is Karen Mitchell, and if you want to understand how a woman who walked into court without a lawyer could make both the judge and the opposing attorney suddenly lose all confidence, we have to go back nearly 20 years. To understand why Brian went completely silent in that courtroom, that we have to go back almost 20 years, back to when we were young. That morning, a blanket of fog still hung over the parking lot outside the base. My black suitcase rested beside my feet. Brian crouched down, fiddling with the handle. This thing's stuck again, he laughed. I keep telling you to buy a new one. I shrugged. It still works. Brian stood up, wrapped his arms around me, and held me close. How long this time? 3 weeks. He let out a quiet sigh. I hate 3 weeks. I smiled. It'll go by before you know it. He shook his head. No, 3 weeks is always too long. We stood there holding each other. Neither of us said another word. The airport announcement echoed overhead. My flight was now boarding. Brian bent down, picked up my suitcase, and smiled. Come on. He rolled it ahead of me. I followed behind. When we reached the security checkpoint, he handed me the suitcase. I'll stay right here, until I can't see you anymore. I laughed. You're such an idiot. He shrugged with a grin. I know. I walked through security, then looked back. Brian was still standing there, one hand tucked into his jacket pocket, the other raised in a small wave. He stayed exactly where he was, until I disappeared around the corner. That day, I truly believed I was the luckiest woman in the world. The first years of our marriage stayed that way. Every time I came home, Brian was always the first person I saw. He'd wrap me in a hug, take my suitcase, then ask the same question every single time. Hungry? It became our ritual, the words I always knew I'd hear, the moment I came home. Then one day, everything changed. I opened the front door. My suitcase was still in my hand. Brian was sitting on the couch. The glow from the television flickered across his face. He didn't stand. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask if I was tired. He just glanced over and said, "You're back." Yeah, I smiled. I've got 3 days off this time. Brian nodded. His eyes never left the TV. Then you'll just leave again. The living room suddenly felt unfamiliar. The sound of my suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor seemed louder than ever. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Maybe he'd get up, maybe he was just exhausted, maybe. Brian never moved. I looked down, and pulled my own suitcase inside. For the first time, it no longer felt like the suitcase that brought me home. It felt like a distance, lying quietly between us. Back then, I still believed that once I retired, everything would go back to the way it used to be. I had no idea, the thing that had changed wasn't the military, it was Brian. The first time I realized something had truly changed was Thanksgiving dinner. Donna set down her knife, then her fork. The soft clink of silverware against porcelain seemed to hush the entire table. She looked straight at me and smiled. Some women know that family comes first. Her eyes drifted toward the military uniform I'd taken off just before coming inside. Karen has always chosen the military instead. No one laughed. Brian's father lowered his head, quietly carving another slice of turkey. Brian's sister stared into her glass. One of the little nieces kept eating mashed potatoes, completely unaware. Only Donna kept her eyes on me, waiting for me to react. I looked at Brian. I only needed one sentence, just one. Mom, don't say that. Brian never looked up. He kept cutting the meat on his plate. The knife scraped against the china. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It became the only sound in the room. I forced a smile. I'm going to grab some more gravy. No one answered. I stood, picked up my plate, and walked into the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Donna's fork lightly tap her plate. No one said a word. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed into the sink. In the dark reflection of the kitchen window, I caught sight of myself. I stood there for a few seconds, took one slow, steady breath, smiled, then walked back to the table, as if nothing had happened. That night, Brian drove us home. The radio stayed off. Neither of us spoke. The only sound inside the car was the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. After a long silence, Brian gave a dry little laugh. You know, you'd better be careful. I turned toward him. Careful about what? One of these days, you're going to start giving orders to me too. I smiled. I've never done that. Brian kept his eyes fixed on the road. The faint smile disappeared from his face. Really? He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, almost under his breath, he said, Sometimes, I feel like the government is your real husband. The air inside the car turned cold. I looked out the passenger window. Streetlights drifted past, one after another, melting into the rain. I almost said something. Almost. But I let the silence win. Back then, I convinced myself. It was nothing more than a hurtful comment, spoken in a moment of loneliness. I didn't know. Brian wasn't just drifting away from me anymore. He had already begun, building a second life, and keeping it hidden from me. By then, I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was just paying attention. One Friday evening, Brian slipped on his jacket, grabbed his car keys, and headed for the door. I've got a meeting with a client. Don't wait up for dinner. I nodded. Okay. Brian walked out. The front door closed with a soft click. A few seconds later, I heard the engine start. Then, silence. I was unloading my suitcase from my latest work trip. When I opened the car door, a receipt slid onto the garage floor. I bent down and picked it up. A restaurant, table for two, 8:17 p.m. Not even close to the part of town Brian said he'd be in. I stared at the receipt for a long time, then folded it, placed it exactly where I'd found it, closed the car door. I didn't call. I didn't text. 2 days later, Brian's phone buzzed. He was in the kitchen. The screen lit up on the counter. Melissa. Just a name, nothing else. Brian saw it. The color drained from his face. He grabbed the phone immediately, and hurried out onto the back porch. The sliding glass door closed behind him. I stayed in the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, through the glass. I watched him with his back turned to me, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding the phone. Then he smiled. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. A few minutes later, Brian came back inside. Client. He said it before I'd even asked. I simply looked at him. Okay. The next night, Brian was in the shower. His phone lit up on the table. A notification appeared on the lock screen. Melissa. Miss you already. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't unlock it. I didn't read another word. Just then, the water stopped running. I looked up. The screen went dark. Everything looked normal again. Brian walked out of the bathroom. He looked at the phone, then at me. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us asked a question. The silence said everything that needed to be said. That night, I sat alone in my home office. I opened my black document case. The restaurant receipt went in first. Then the bank statements, an email, a receipt, a handwritten note. One by one, I arranged every page neatly inside. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth deserves to be protected. 3 weeks later, Brian placed a stack of papers on the dining room table. I want a divorce. I looked down at the first page, then back at him. Okay. Just one word. Brian blinked. Maybe. He'd prepared himself for tears. For a screaming match. For desperate pleas to stay, but not for calm acceptance. I picked up the pen, signed my name, then slid the papers back across the table. Brian didn't reach for them right away. He just stared at me, for a long time, as if, for the very first time, he no longer understood. The woman sitting across from him. That morning, I arrived at the courthouse before almost everyone else. My black document case was still in my hand. I set it on the table, then quietly took my seat, and waited. About 10 minutes later, Brian walked in. He was wearing a navy blue suit. Donna came in beside him. Still wearing that same confident smile, Brian's attorney entered last. He stopped to shake hands with a few people around the courtroom, smiling as if this case had already been decided before it even began. Brian looked at me. His eyes drifted to the empty chair beside me. No attorney, he chuckled. So, where's your lawyer? I looked up. I don't have one. Brian slowly shook his head. Karen, you're smarter than this. Donna laughed. Or maybe she thinks. If she sits there quietly, she'll somehow win. A few people in the gallery laughed with her. I didn't answer. I simply opened my document case, took out a pen, placed it neatly in front of me, then closed the case. All rise. The judge entered the courtroom. After the opening formalities, he opened the case file. The first page, the second, then the third. His movements gradually slowed. He read one page again, then read it a second time. The hum of the air conditioner became the only sound left in the room. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Brian's attorney slowly stood. Your Honor, may I take a look at that file? The judge slid it across the bench. The attorney leaned over. Read the first page, then the second. His finger suddenly stopped. The pen slipped from his hand, rolled slowly across the table, and came to a stop. Oh, my God. No one spoke. Brian looked at his attorney. Donna looked at Brian. The judge looked at Brian. Brian looked at me. 5 full seconds. Nothing but silence. Then Brian finally spoke. What's going on? His voice was barely above a whisper. No one moved. Brian frowned. What's going on? His attorney never looked up from the file. He didn't answer. Donna's smile began to fade. What is it? The judge removed his glasses and placed them gently on the bench. Mrs. Mitchell, can you confirm that every document in this file was prepared by you? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor, and you accept responsibility for the accuracy of every one of them? I do. The judge gave a small nod, then turned toward Brian. Now it's your turn. Mr. Mitchell, in your divorce filing, you state that this represents the complete list of your marital assets. Is that correct? Brian answered without hesitation. Yes. Everything is there. The judge opened a second binder. He placed it beside Brian's financial disclosure. 2 files, side by side. Interesting. He spoke slowly. Because these 2 sets of documents tell 2 very different stories. Brian forced a small smile. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. For the first time that morning, his attorney turned and looked directly at him. Don't say another word. Brian froze. He stared at his lawyer. Why? The attorney took a slow breath, but he didn't answer. He simply closed the file and lowered his eyes. And in that moment, Brian finally realized something had happened that was no longer under his control. Brian took a slow, steady breath. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, I can explain. No one responded. The judge opened another file. He pulled out a bank statement and placed it in the center of the bench. This transfer, it was made 12 days before you filed for divorce. Why wasn't this account disclosed in your financial statement? Brian looked down, only for a few seconds. Then he raised his head. That's my personal account. His voice sounded firmer, as if he'd finally found solid ground again. Donna let out a quiet sigh of relief. She leaned toward the attorney. I told you, it's just a misunderstanding. The attorney didn't answer. His eyes never left the bank statement. He didn't even blink. The judge turned another page. What about this account? Brian froze. That's personal too. Both of them? The judge's voice never changed. Still calm, still measured. Brian swallowed. Yes, they're both personal accounts. For the first time, his attorney turned completely toward him. You never told me about these accounts. Brian answered immediately. I didn't think they were relevant. The attorney slowly shook his head. No, they're very relevant. Brian opened his mouth to speak again. The attorney gently placed a hand on his arm. Don't. Brian stared at him. Say something. You're my lawyer. The attorney was silent for several seconds. Then he spoke so quietly. Only the people closest to him could hear. Right now, the smartest thing you can do is stop talking. The entire courtroom seemed to freeze. Donna jumped to her feet. No, my son would never. There's been some kind of mistake. The judge looked up. One glance was all it took. Mrs. Mitchell, if you interrupt these proceedings one more time, I'll have court security escort you out. Donna went completely still, then slowly sat back down. Her fingers tightened around her purse. No one spoke again. The steady hum of the air conditioner. The quiet rustle of turning pages. The clerk's pen moving across paper. Every sound in the courtroom suddenly felt impossibly loud. Brian turned to look at me. For the first time that entire morning, there was no confidence left in his eyes. No anger, no defiance. Only confusion. Maybe he was waiting for me to say something. Just one sentence. That this was all a misunderstanding. That I would help him. I never looked back at him. I simply lowered my eyes, opened my black document case, removed one more document, placed it on the table, and gently slid it toward the judge. Without saying a single word, the judge picked up the document. Read it carefully. Very slowly. Then he looked back at Brian. Mr. Mitchell, based on the evidence now before this court, I have sufficient reason to believe that you deliberately concealed marital assets. Brian closed his eyes. For the first time he had nothing left to say. No explanation, no argument, no way out. His attorney quietly closed the file, removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then leaned back in his chair. He understood. This case could no longer be saved. As for Brian, he still had no idea that the worst part hadn't even begun. The courtroom fell into complete silence. The judge closed the file. The soft thud of the binder against the bench was barely audible, but in that room, it sounded like the end of something. He looked at Brian. Mr. Mitchell, based on the evidence currently before this court, I am ordering a full forensic review of all financial accounts connected to this case. No one spoke. Brian remained perfectly still. His hands were locked tightly together. Maybe, he was still hoping, this was nothing more than another legal formality. His attorney knew better. He slowly removed his glasses, set them on the table, then quietly closed his file. He didn't argue. He didn't object. He didn't ask for a continuance. He simply sat down, in silence. Donna leaned toward him. Her voice trembled. Is it serious? The attorney never looked at her. He simply closed his eyes and gave the smallest nod, almost too slight to notice. Donna covered her mouth with her hand. She tried to speak, but no words came. The judge continued. Effective immediately, all previously submitted financial disclosures will be subject to review. The division of marital assets will be suspended until the verification process has been completed. Brian turned toward me. For the first time in nearly 20 years, there was no competition left in his eyes. No anger, no confidence, only exhaustion. And something that looked a lot like despair. I met his eyes. There was no satisfaction. No resentment, no victory. I simply closed my document case. The latch clicked softly into place. Brian lowered his head, as if, for the first time, he finally understood what he had truly lost. Donna wiped at her tears. Mascara streaked beneath her eyes. She opened her mouth, trying to call Brian's name, but no sound came out. She turned away, unable to let anyone see her like that. No one comforted her. No one said a word. The only sound left was the steady hum of the air conditioner overhead. The judge picked up his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Both parties will be notified of the next court date. Bang! The sound echoed through the courtroom. No one stood up right away. Brian remained in his chair, staring blankly at the empty space in front of him. His attorney quietly gathered his papers. For the first time since walking into that courtroom, he didn't say a single word to his client. I stood, picked up my document case, and walked toward the door. Behind me, a voice barely rose above a whisper. Karen. I stopped, just for a second, but I never turned around. I opened the door. Light from the hallway spilled into the courtroom. Then the door slowly closed behind me, leaving Brian, sitting there alone. I walked out of the courtroom. The heavy wooden door closed quietly behind me. The latch clicked shut. The early afternoon sun spilled across the courthouse steps. My black suitcase was still exactly where I'd left it that morning. I bent down, pulled up the handle. Click. The familiar sound echoed softly. I wrapped my hand around the grip. Behind me, the courthouse door opened. I didn't turn around. I already knew who it was. Footsteps stopped a few feet behind me. Karen. It was Brian. His voice was nothing like it had been that morning. When he'd laughed as I walked into the courtroom, I stayed where I was, never looked back. I'm sorry. 3 words. The 3 words I'd waited years to hear. A gentle breeze swept across the courthouse steps. Neither of us spoke again. The rustling leaves filled the silence between us. I gave the slightest nod, just once, not because I'd forgiven him, but because there was nothing left to say. I started down the steps, one at a time. My suitcase rolled quietly behind me. The sound felt so much lighter than the last time I'd pulled it through the front door of the house we once shared. Then a memory found me. Years earlier, Brian had been the one pulling this very same suitcase through an airport terminal. He'd turned around, smiled, and said, "I'll stay right here until you're completely out of sight." I took another step and left that memory behind with it. I reached the bottom of the staircase. The suitcase caught for a moment between two uneven stones. I bent down, lifted it gently, then kept walking. No looking back, no hesitation. Maybe Brian was still standing there behind me. Maybe he wasn't. I didn't know, and I no longer needed to. The truth that came out in that courtroom didn't change who I was. It simply gave me back the faith in myself that I'd lost somewhere along the way. People continued walking past the courthouse. No one knew. A marriage had just come to an end. No one knew. A woman had just reclaimed her life. I smiled, just a little, then disappeared into the crowd, with my suitcase rolling quietly behind me, until both of us faded from view beyond the courthouse steps. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional stories about justice, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild your life, I'd be honored to have you subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.